Good afternoon to this Saturday, and what we're going to do is look at the table and how we can create that. What we're doing here is looking at just the basics of furniture and how that so far we've created everything, pretty much everything, from just a single piece of geometry. But the more complex objects get, the more you're going to start to build them from multiple bits of geometry. But not need to worry about having in some cases you have to worry about the geometry being all one solid piece and being what we call watertight. In other cases, you don't need to worry about everything being one solid piece of geometry and not being watertight. Sometimes, even within bigger objects, you have this multiple times. Some very complex pieces might be all watertight, but that watertight piece is then just basically bashed into the geometry. It just looks like it's there. Like it's all solidly put together. But what we're going to do is build our table like we did in class, and we're also going to UV it, and then we're also going to bring it into the scene, and we're going to set up the materials, and then we're going to explain the different ways of making the materials. Oh well, why we make different materials, multiple materials on one object, and all that kind of jazz. I'm also going to do at the end of the video additional 2 ways of making an element of this table that we discussed in class. But I'm going to do the same way we did in class now. So, okay, so what is this table? It's a big round table. We're going to start off with the biggest piece first, and then work our way down to the smallest piece. So biggest piece is going to be the top, and then it's going to be the base, then it's going to be the ball, then it's going to be the legs. Cool. So, what's the base primitive of that top? Well, it's a cylinder, isn't it? So, let's start off with a cylinder. So, bring in the cylinder. Now I decided this was going to be radius 135 in class, and then its depth is going to be something like, I don't know, 15? Yeah, let's go for 15. Maybe a bit less than that. Maybe go for 10. Oh, I'll put, no, let's, 20, let's go for 10. Yeah, let's go for 10. Cool. So we've got the basic dimensions in there, but one thing to think about is if this is in a first-person game, you've got to think about the density of the object. So if this was in a first-person game, you're going to get right up to it. You're going to see these polygons really easily, and it's going to defeat the whole point. We're living in an age of graphical intensity at the minute, so everything can be nice and high-res within reason, optimization standing. But also with our projects, we're not making a full game. We're making a isolated scene, so we can maybe put a little bit more than we usually would in. However, if we were making a game where, like some top-down game from like up here, then we'd maybe stick to 20. But what I'm going to do is give myself in my subdivision axis 60, because I think 60 is enough to give it roundness, but not enough to be like over the top. And let's make sure that this is in the middle of the world as well. There you go. Always make sure we're building in the middle of the world. And I'm going to guesstimate eyeball in a height at the minute, because I can always change that when I start bringing everything else in. So I'll bring it there. Right. Cool, so I've got my roundness. Right, what else is in there? So we've got this lip that runs around the outside, which looks to be about 8 inches deep. Something around there. And now I know from the references that we looked at in class, there's also the same is mimicked underneath. So you have a rim around the inside. So construction-wise, what I'm thinking is this whole table, this middle part of the table here, is going to be a piece of big solid wood, and then the wood around the outside might be like steam-treated wood, which is steamed and then bent into place. So what I'm going to do is add an edge at the top and the bottom. I'm going to eyeball in the position as much as I can. And then I'm going to make the recesses, because underneath I want to, if the character was to crouch down and look underneath, I want them to see that it is actually a properly constructed table. And then on top, you can see that we do actually have this glass, and there is a little bit of a recess there, so I kind of want to mimic that. I want to make this as nice as possible, as believable as possible. So what I'm going to do is hold tab, and then select all the edges at the top here, and then just mesh tools connect. Make sure I've got one, and I'm just going to bring that out to, I don't know, about there. There you go. So just eyeball that in. And then I'm going to do the same thing underneath. So holding tab, make sure I've got nothing selected. Holding tab, do a nice paint select down there, mesh tools connect. And then just scale out. So what I want to do is, I can come into X-ray mode by clicking the X-ray button there. And I can just scale out. And I'm going to position my camera either above or below or to the side, where I can almost like see, You know, okay, that looks like it lines up. So I'm happy with that. I'm not gonna lose sleep over it. Cool. So that's that rim outside done. So now I want to select all the faces on the inside, and might as well do this top and bottom at the same time as well. So select all the faces at the top and the bottom, extrude, and then I'm just going to pull my thickness in. So underneath and above we have that. Really, really nice. Super cool. So we've done quite a lot of work so far. However, the next step, I'm going to just add a bit of detail while I'm here so I don't forget. But it's not really detail, it's more about solving an issue that comes from geometry. And it's the sharp edges you get. So currently this edge right here is super, super sharp. It's a 90-degree angle, which means any more angle towards 91 degree and we'll turn it into a blade. That's too sharp. It also means the light cuts across it really sharply, and that kind of makes stuff look very artificial. There you go. So what I'm going to do is bevel a few edges just to add a little bit of roundness. And the bevel's only going to be really lightweight as well. It's not going to be an intense bevel. So what I'm doing is coming from the top inner edge here to this edge here, round to the bottom outer edge and the bottom inner edge, just those, and I'm going to bevel all those at the same time so they have the exact same bevel ratios. So I'm going to hit bevel, which is up here. Boom. Oh, and you know what? Actually, that actually looks perfect. Yeah. And that's it. That's all I'm going to do. And now what that does, it gives it a little bit of a nice smoother edge. Doesn't look as sharp. Cool. So my ratio I had then was 0.15. Now that's not going to be the same per object as well. Depending on the distance between an edge, the numbers can kind of differ. Using the standard settings, there are ways to control that globally, but they're a faff. So we're not going to bother looking at them just yet. That's like, we can look at those later on. Cool. So moving on, what I'm going to do is come underneath, and I'm going to again, remember, look at these references. If you look at under the table in some of those references, you'll see that there's a rim around the outside with a little extrusion downwards. That's like going to be construction supporting edges. It's going to be supporting these legs. It's going to give it the legs to kind of push against something. So I'm going to add that. Same way I did it before. I'm just going to paint all the edges. Mesh tool connect. I'm going to bring that edge in to about there. And then what I'm going to do is bevel that edge as well. So with that edge, I'm going to bevel it. And then with that bevel, I can decide how big that piece of wood that comes down is. So, about there. And then I'm just going to extrude it down, like that. There you go. Looks a bit more realistic. Awesome. Now while I'm here, I'm also going to make the glass that goes on top. Now what I'm not going to do is try and turn this surface here into glass. What I'm going to do is extrude this surface. Well, I'm going to duplicate this surface alone, which is not the same way we normally duplicate objects. To duplicate a specific area of faces, you have to do a bit of a different duplication. But why I'm doing that is because I want to have one material which is glass, and then another material underneath, which is going to be the wood or whatever, and then that'll give you the impression of glass. You know, gives you a bit more of an in-depth feel. So what I'm going to do is just select all the faces around here on top. So at the bottom, I'm not touching anything, just the faces around the middle and the top. Now to duplicate this section, we do not Control D. We don't do that. What we do is come to Edit Mesh, Duplicate at the bottom. There you go. So now what we'll have is a duplicated section like that. And I can just position that in place to help, to wherever I want, like there, for instance. Very cool. So that's the top of the table done. Very, very nice. Now what I'm going to do is make the base. So the base, same jazz. It's just a cylinder that's got kind of two sections. So again, another cylinder. Now in class I believe I kept this as 20, but for this I'm going to make this 30. Again, make sure it's in the middle of the world. Grab the top section, bring it down, and then scale it out to get my How big is that? So let's look at the table as a whole. Let's try and get that, you know, distance from here to here. Feels about right. Cool. The depth seems right as well. The same thing, I'm going to extrude up the middle bit, so I can either add a new edge in the middle using the Mesh Tools Connect, and then create that there, or I can select the faces and then do an extrusion. Either way, you do the exact same thing. So I'm going to extrusion inwards a little bit, like there, and then push up a little bit. Just like that. Push down. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Brilliant. Now the next one is a sphere underneath, and in class we spoke about two different types of sphere. We've got the poled sphere, which is our standard sphere like this, and then we got the, I believe it's called an isosphere, and that is actually comes from a cube that we actually smooth a few times, and then that turns into a sphere. There you go. Now there are reasons why you'd use one over the other. I spoke about it in class, talking about how this one is geometrically better because the isosphere is all quads, and all the quads are pretty much the same size. We talked about regulation a little bit, where regulation is the maintaining of polygon size and polygon density across the surface. It can get tighter, but it has to be tighter in the right areas. Whereas this is, for me, not geometrically great because you have vastly different sizes of polygons. Nothing's ever really square, and at the top and bottom you've got triangles. So you go from like long horizontal rectangles here to tall horizontal rectangles here and triangles. For me, that's not great. However, the trade-off is this, you can get a nice low poly count and it still looks spherical. This, to make this look nice and spherical without looking chunky, you have to have a higher poly count. But this one is easier to UV, and this one is a pain in the ass to UV. So for this, I'm actually going to use the normal sphere. And I'm just going to bring down the like 10. So not super great. But for this, like I said, I'm just going to use the normal sphere. And then I'm just going to... It's like that. Something like that. Cool. Let's move this down and into a bit of a better position. Let's bring Manny in. Come on, Manny. So I think this needs to be scaled down as well. Like that, cool. Awesome. I'll leave it like that. That feels nice. So what I'm going to do now is make the legs, or make a leg, and then we'll duplicate it later on. So there are loads of different ways you can make these type of legs. I'm going to show you the way I showed you in class, and then at the end of the video I'm going to show you another two ways. This way is a little bit longer and it's a little bit trickier, but it's simpler like through technique. The techniques to make this is really, really simple. You've just got to be very, very on the ball about what you're doing. The other two, they're much quicker and simpler to produce once you know how to use the tools, but on a technical level they're a bit harder. So what is this? Well, we spoke about it in class. It's like a soft S that comes from the bottom here, raises up and comes underneath here. And we can also see from the reference that you can see that the depth of the wood is actually quite thin, maybe 5 centimeters, something like that. So what I'm going to do is make a cube, suitably small, bring it into place. So that's still not small enough, so I can go even smaller, something like that. Cool. So we're going to come from the bottom where the ball is and go up to where it joins the table. And I spoke about my kind of way of thinking about this. I call it making the journey, and it's to stop me and it's to stop people who I teach doing something like this. Oops, it is. Doing something like this. So you just start extruding kind of aimlessly. And kind of make messy stuff like that. And you know, if you're extruding, especially when you're extruding a lot, if you extrude and you get like, you have to do small extrusions over after a while. You know, one, it's inconsistent. Look at how messy it is. And after a while, you get bored of extruding, so you kind of unconsciously, subconsciously make them bigger and smaller. So you'll have areas where it's tighter here, but then areas where it gets wider and wider. And that's that regulation thing I was talking about. My method of thinking about stuff is, again, making the journey. I will start off, this is the beginning of the journey. So this face is at the beginning, so it's going to be right here. So that's where we start off. This face is going to go to the end of the journey. So it's going to go up here. So right there I've already decided how long that journey is going to be, where it's going from, to. Oh yeah, I also, as I saw before, I made it wider, so I kind of looked at the reference and decided how wide this is going to be. So yeah, I've made that kind of little shape there. So now what I do is I'm going to add an edge in the middle. So mesh tools connect, add an edge in there. There we go. And I'm just going to rotate it so it's a little bit fatter. And you'll see why in a sec. Because this, now that I've rotated this about 45 degrees, it's the same width that is at the top and the bottom. And it'll all kind of make sense. Now, on the reference, when we look at these different references, the middle part of this whole leg is kind of in this position anyway. You know, I could move it a bit further forward if I wanted to, or a bit further back, but I'm thinking it's somewhere around the middle, so I'm going to say there. Now that I've added that middle bit, I'm going to add an edge in the middle down here, and in the middle up here. So I'm always adding these equally spaced apart edges. And then on this one, I'm going to start to move this to here. I'm going to start to move this to here. So now we're starting to get that curve appearing. And then I'm going to do it one more time. Well, not one more time. I'm going to do it again. So I add those edges now in the new edges. And again, I'm going to just start to curve this shape a little bit. So that's looking nice. And I can just do one more. And why I quite like doing this as well, especially with people who are new to modeling, is this really forces you to observe the shape and control the geometry. Because these last movements are very subtle. Like that. And then I can just fix up anything that I'm seeing that I need to kind of fix up, you know. Like that. Nice, good. So if you look at that now, very good. Awesome. And that's all the pieces done. Really, this whole table is made up of 5 pieces. The glass, the table, the leg, the ball, the base. And now we're going to UV it. And the reason that we've not made all 4 of the legs is because they're all going to be identical UV. So what's the point in UVing one and then UVing it again, then UVing it again? If you have stuff that you're going to be using a lot of, right, repeating banisters or anything like that, make one of them, UV that, and then every time you UV it, every time you duplicate it, the UVs will be duplicated with it. So you only have to UV it once. Also, just to help me out, I'm going to delete the faces on this that I'm never going to see. So the top and the bottom faces, I'm going to get rid of. Here we go. Right. Oh, bevel. I want to bevel these down here. So yeah, I'm just going to bevel these points like I did before. Make it small. There we go. Awesome. Right, so UVing this is really simple. And it also introduces us to some kind of newer concepts of UVing, because so far we've only really looked at doing planar stuff. But this, we'll have to look at stuff in a little bit of a different light. So let's have a look at what our UVs look like in general. Okay, so these are our UVs. Not great, not usable, you know. The only usable one in this is actually the sphere. This is why this particular sphere is good, is because the UVs it gives you, if you're just applying like a very generic texture, they're actually already set up for you pretty well. I'm not actually going to UV the ball. The isosphere ball gives you a much better optimized surface, but the UVing of it is horrendous to do. It's a bit of a pain in the ass. Just for speed though, I'm going to keep it like that. So technically, my sphere is done. So we'll ignore that. Okay. So whenever I've got my UVs, I always go for the biggest, flattest, or simplest sections first, and then I work my way down through the detail, because I'm not going to go in there and UV the tiny details. Because if I'm dealing with a big mess here, I've been modeling something for ages, and then when I open up my UVs, it's just an explosion of UV mess and nothing makes sense. The way to make that cleaner, or start making sense of it, is to get rid of the big geometry, the big UV sections, and that's probably going to be big simple pieces. So I go through to the big pieces first, and then by the end of it, what I've got a lot of little bits I got to figure out, but they're generally going to be quite simple anyway. So what's the simplest part of this whole table? Well, it's going to be all the flat planar section. So this glass section here is technically already done, because I can't really change this to this. This is technically perfectly fine. We look at the checkerboard, it's technically perfectly fine. But for the sake of, being proper and going through the whole steps, what I'm going to do is UV this. So what is it? It's a big disc. Some people might say this is a cylindrical object. Technically it is geometrically, but really where the face is facing, they're all flat and they're all facing in one direction. So that's a planar. And now what direction are they facing? They're facing in the y-axis. So we go to create planar option box, and just make sure, because if I reset the settings, that keep image width height ratio is turned on. I don't know why this is turned off by default. Please turn it on all the time. Oops. And it's going down the y-axis. So boom, done. So I can move it out of the way. Every time I've projected a UV, I'll move it out of the way. Also, just because I've projected something doesn't mean it's finished and done. I think that's a common mistake with a lot of people as well when they first start UVing, is they hit projection and then they think it's done. That's not the case. What projection does in this case is just help to make sense of that mess, helps make sense of the shape we're trying to deal with, especially if we're dealing with a very kind of complex shape and all the UVs have got really kind of messed up. There's no way I can create a good UV out of that, so I've got to project it down, basically lay it down as a simpler, more recognizable shape by using one of a few different tools. So I've done that, planar projection, bang, that's done. While we're dealing with planars, I'm just going to isolate off the table. What are the other planars we've got going on? Well, we've got the top of the table, and then we've got the underside here and around there. So let's do that. So I'm going to grab the top of the table, of the inside, the little recess. Underside, I'm going to grab, oops, daisy, this section, and I'm going to grab this section. And I'm going to project these all at the same time. So with all those flat planar sections selected, I'm going to go to create planar. Now this should remember our settings as well. Boom. Awesome. Move it out of the way. And this one is purple because there's blue UVs and red UVs sat on top of each other. Remember that red UVs are just facing away from the camera, so the projection is looking down at the object like this, which means that these faces are facing away from it. So if I modify flip, there we go. So all modify flip does is literally flip the UV. So done, they're done. Okay. So what have we got left on the table? Right, so we've got two bits, and we're going to do these the same way, but not at the same time. We've got the outside section running around the outside, and then we've got this little section underneath. So what we're going to do is do the outside section first. Now we're going to look at that tool, not even a tool, the function. It's a really good function, and it's called grow selection. Well, you got grow selection and shrink selection, and I'll show you what it does. So what what grow selection does is if I have a face selected there, shift and full stop grows a selection. Shift and comma shrinks a selection. So what I can do is select, say, like a run of faces, and I can start extruding outwards like that, expanding my selection outwards. That's what I'm going to do. So what I'm going to do is, again, I guess I'll isolate this just to make sure. Boom. I'm going to grab the outside most edge or face running around like that, and then I'm going to hit shift and full stop. I'm going to grow until my face lands here, and it should do the same thing underneath because I've beveled all the edges at the same time. I should have the right amount of edges. So shift full stop. Okay, so I got to there. Look underneath, and yes, it's gone to the right place. Cool. So I'd always check if I'm doing a grow selection. I'm always going to check: am I over selecting or under selecting somewhere? Cool. So when I've done that, what I'm going to do is create, and instead of planar, I'm going to do another one. I'm going to do cylindrical because this is a cylinder. It's a round piece. A majority of the information is going to be on the outside of this, so I'm going to hit cylindrical. And what cylindrical does, if you watch the planar ones, is when you've done the planar one, you might have noticed this big grey camera shape appear. And that's basically the projection camera. So what we're going to do instead is hit cylindrical, and then you might be able to see, if you look carefully, you might be able to see that grey shape is here, but now it's wrapping around an object. And what it's doing is it's taking this orthographic picture of the object and laying it out. So now you can see that most of our geometry gets turned into this shape. And we're almost done. It's not finished, and this is what I was saying before. Just because I've done projection doesn't mean it's finished. You know, far from it. There's not many steps involved, but there's more than one. So what it's done is it's taken a picture, found a point to make a seam. So where's the seam? Okay, there's a seam. So you'll see where'd you go? There you go. You see this white edge here? This is the seam. This is where it's been cut and then basically folded outwards, unwrapped. But this camera is still technically an orthographic camera. And orthographic cameras, anything orthographic, doesn't have perspective. So when it's looking at it like this, so we're looking from the side, what we're seeing is just these faces. But what we're not seeing are the flat faces on the top and the bottom. But what we're also not seeing in here, but what the camera's seeing, are the faces on the inside facing inwards. So like the thin faces on the inside of the rim. And that's what them little purple strips are. They're the red faces on the inside. So obviously this isn't great because it means that I can't texture this properly. And if we check our checkerboard, we can see that here, that's totally not good. And on top, totally not good. And inside, totally not good. So, we have to do one more thing. Now on this one, this is wider than it is taller. And if we look at these faces as well, so this face here, this is like a long rectangle, a wide rectangle. But if we look at this in here, this is a very tall rectangle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unfold this vertically because I need to flip out these faces here upwards and flip out these faces here downwards. And it's dead simple. All I have to do is go to modify, unfold option box at the bottom, and if I reset the settings, you're probably going to have unfold 3D, which is not going to give us a great result. Now in the morning class it gave me the result I wanted to kind of say why it wasn't good with, and in the afternoon class it gave me a better result for some reason. Yeah, so if you do that, it does this. Now it's still kind of bent as well, which is annoying, but it's at a bit of an angle as well. What we're going to do though instead is we're going to do the better version of this, and instead of using the unfold 3D, what we're going to do is use unfold legacy and then use vertical, because we're going to unfold it vertically and not touch the horizontals, which means that when we unfold it we get this. So it's nice and straight, it's perfect, there's no wobbliness, it's not at an angle, and there's no slight bend to it either. It's a perfectly straight, perfect UV. Now you can see that all them UVs now are perfect. Perfect. And we're going to do the exact same thing on this down here. So what I'm going to do is grab the faces on the top section there, or the bottom section I guess, and then shift full stop, grow selection to grab the two sides. Let's move this that way first. shift it. Again, cylindrical projection. Grab it in UV mode, not in face mode, in UV mode. And annoyingly, you have got UV shell here, but UV shell, if we click on it, everything turns orange because it's a face selection. So what we want to do is go to UV mode. UV mode, and then again, modify. It should remember our settings, so we can just double check if we want to. But boom, done. No wobbliness, just perfect UVs. There we go. So that's that top table done. And that's the glass done. So we make our way down. Now what we're going to do is do the same thing on this bottom section. Now this is going to be a little bit different. Not a little, well, it's going to be a bit different because in construction of this top section here, yes, what we've done is actually separated everything as it would be in construction. So you'd have this inner plate here be one piece of geometry, be one piece of wood, and then the rim on the outside would be another piece of wood, and this bottom bit here would be another piece of wood. So they're all separate UVs for a reason. On the bottom though, what we're going to have are 3 separate UVs, one for the, well, 4 because one for the very bottom, one for the very bottom, and then one for the very top, because they're both planar, they're both flat. And then we're going to have 2 cylindricals, one for this rim here, and then one for this rim going around here and here. Because this is like a donut shape. What I don't want to see in anyone's UVs are donut shapes, are disc shapes, unless they're let me make examples. So we've got two discs here. Technically they're both the same. But if I see something like this in a person's UV, where it's just like a really thin ring like that, I'm going to want you to turn it into a strip. And we're going to look at how to turn these into strips eventually, because that's a wasted strip. You know, it's a wasted piece of geometry. The size of the edge on the outside and the size of the edge on the inside, yes, they are different sizes, but only a little bit. Only a little bit. The stretching of the texture isn't actually going to be that noticeable. Where I don't mind seeing discs is this. Like, I don't mind seeing this because the outside edge and the inside edge are very different. You know, that's a big size difference there. So what you're going to have if you turn that into a strip is like just a horrible big stretchy texture. It's not going to look good. And again, we'll look at examples of that when we come to it. So let's do the simple ones. Let's get the planars out the way first. So I'm going to grab the bottom. I'm going to grab the top. Let's make sure I've got all of that. Yep, both of them too. And I'm going to do a planar again. Just check our settings. Boom. So boom, move you out the way, and that should be both of them. There we go. Just flip the red. And then I'm going to do the cylindrical pieces as 2 separate projections. Now this is because these will be 2 separate pieces. You know, you'd have two pieces of marble or wood or whatever, and then they'd be kind of like constructed on top of each other. I'm only separating the 2 top faces and the bottom face because they're flat. Cool, so I select this bit, including the little bevel shape, and then do a cylindrical. Select it. Now I'm hitting Control U there because again, it'll remember our UV settings, our unfold settings from last time we did this. So Control U is just a hotkey for it. And then I'll do the same thing here. So just select that. Do a cylindrical. There we go. Now this one here is a very funny one because it will have a little bit of stretching on the inside there. You can see that the UVs are getting a little bit goofy around the inside. I'm gonna let that one pass. Um, strips like this are always better than round shapes, because round shapes, as you can see here, you've got space on the corners that are really hard to put things in. But strips like this, well, the big rectangles, and you can jigsaw rectangles really nicely and easily. So if there's not too much distortion, we're okay. The only time that's ever different is when you're dealing with like films or like FMV. You know, well, your art lead will tell you when and where you need to do this kind of stuff. Cool. So boom, c'est bon. So now what we've got are the UVs for the glass, the table, and that. So let's make sure everything's kind of in its own little space. Like that. There we go. So all we've done so far as well is cylindrical and projection. Cylindrical and planar. Next what we're going to do is move on to the last piece, because obviously if we're using the poled sphere, then the UVs are already done for us. Now we're dealing with this. Now this is different because it's a bit of a curvier shape. It's a long piece, not a round piece. But this can sometimes stump people. But when I'm looking at this kind of stuff, I'm always thinking about what does its base primitive look like it comes from. If it looks like a more rounder shape, I might approach it as a cylindrical. If it looks like a more cubey shape, I'm going to approach it like a planar. So in class as well, I actually showed you how to do this the long way. So I'm going to show you how to do it the much more efficient short way. I just wasn't thinking about it at the time. So this object, if I isolate it off on its own, this object here, we have a top and a bottom, nice and flat, and then we have these annoying little side faces here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the top faces and the bottom faces, like that, and I'm going to planar project those from the y-axis, or the x-axis, either of them, x or y, it doesn't really matter, because again, because they're a bit of a curvy shape, they're either going to be facing upwards or outwards. So just to mix it up, I think I'll do an X. There we go. So I've got my UVs laid out there. Red and blue. Let's flip the red. There we go. And remember, red is just because it's facing away from the projector. All that's left now are going to be these annoying little bits here. And they're going to be facing down the Z-axis. So if we look at the axis there at the bottom left, which is behind my head, but when you look at it at the bottom left, you'll see that they're actually facing down the Z-axis. So what I'm going to do is planar Z to get those laid out like that. Simple. Cool. And then just flip the red. I don't know why I rotated them. Right then, so what I'm going to do is first of all unfold these bits, because if we look at the checkerboard of these, you'll see that they're a bit stretched. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unfold them using that unfold legacy vertical, because I need to basically stretch them upwards and downwards. They're the same width, the width is perfectly fine, so I just need to do the up and down. So I'll do both at the same time, grab both of them in UV mode, go up my planar legacy, make sure I'm vertical, so you'll see the UVs now fix up. Look at that, perfect. And what's left here are these little long bits. Now, let's have a look to see what happens if I just sew that edge onto that edge. So what I'm doing here is I'm sewing edges together. This is the next part of UVing. Once we've done projections, we sometimes cut bits off, or sometimes we sew bits together to create fewer or more UVs, depending on what we're doing. So if I hover over these edges, you'll be able to see that the red line appears on, the red edge appears on both pieces. That's basically saying these two pieces correspond. So if I want to sew them together to make a UV, to make a one UV, I'm going to go to select the edges first, cut and sew, and then move and sew. Click that, and then boom. Oh, so you see there that it's actually goofed up my UV. I've lost that nice rectangle, but now I've got this like S shape, and it's distorted it, and now everything's what side that I can't see what side that's working. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Boom. So all my UVs are getting goofy here. My UVs on the side are goofy, so I don't want it. I have an approach for dealing with stuff like this, and it's why I go from my big shapes first down to my small shapes, is that by the time you get to your small shapes, a lot of the time it's the little depth geometry like this, little side pieces. And what I do is I just grab them all in face mode. So I'll grab all this chunk in face mode. Not these, obviously, they're done. Grab these, and I'm just going to cut them all up into individual chunks. So cut all them up into individual chunks, and now they're all individual. So I can now select all those edges. But what's going to happen is, because they're all separate faces now, they're not going to distort and change the shape. They might distort it a little bit, but they're not going to distort it that much. So you see there that it's not actually made any difference to this edge going down. This is all perfect. So now they've sewn on all individually. All I need to do now is sew on the connecting edges to each of them. So I'll just select all those edges there. It doesn't matter that I've selected these blue edges here as well, because you can't sew an already sewn edge. So nothing's going to happen there. So I'm just going to drag a selection box over that section. So I grab those little white sections, the little white V shapes, and then move and sew them all together. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side, which is going to sew that lot on. Same thing's going to happen. I do the same thing. There we go. So now you can see that there's very, very little distortion going on. There's a little bit, but it all comes on the outside where I've sewn these little bits on. So now what I'm going to do is, before I sew this last piece back on, this piece here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to straighten these up, so that all these bits on the side actually align to the edges in the middle. And this is really, really simple. Dead simple. In UV mode, I'm just going to select the UVs I want to affect. So here, I want to align these two outside UVs to this UV here. And how we do that is actually in our UV toolkit up on the right hand side here. And it's in Align and Snap. And in Align and Snap, you've got this Align right at the top. And these are really simple. You'll hover over and it'll tell you what it does. So, stop it. There we go. Align UVs or UV shells along the U-axis to the left minimum. Basically it means this will align everything to the leftmost UV. This one will align all the UVs to the middle. This one will align them all to the rightmost UV. So for instance, if I click this one on the left, they all get pushed over to the left hand side. If I click this one in the middle, they all get merged to the middle. If I click one on the right, merges to the right. This is aligning them to the uppermost UV, to the middle, to the lowermost UV. So on all of these, you can see that all the outside UVs are below the inside section here. So all these are going to get aligned upwards. So grab all that section, align upwards. Grab all that section, align upwards. Dead quick. And to do that really, really fast, what I'm also doing is pressing G, and I've talked about this a good few times. When you use a tool and you press G, that's repeat last used tool. And because the last used tool for me was align upwards, all you have to do is select the UVs, G, select the UVs, G, select the UVs, G. And then if I look carefully as well, I can see that all these UVs going down the side are a little bit curvy. So what I'm going to do is grab all the outside vertical UVs, and I think I'm just going to align them to the middle vertical, so the second one in, like that. There we go. Like that, perfect. And then I can sew this last bit on, which shouldn't have any distortion. This should go on perfectly. Okay, there's a little bit of distortion, but again, I can go through. Now this one, it's not going to be the same on each of them, so I'm actually going to have a look to see if I need to go up, middle, or down. So this top one here, I'm going to use this right hand side section as a gauge. This one, all this top group here, need to come up. Boom. This one needs to come up. This one needs to come up. This one needs to come up. This one is fine. At this point, these now need to come down because these two edges here, these two UVs, are above the right-hand section. So these now to come down, come down, come down, come down. And again, I'm pressing G to speed that up. Down, down, down. That looks fine. Now we need to come up again. So these, again, these two UVs are above the right-hand side. So up, 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 up. Perfect. Perfect. So those UVs are absolutely perfect. Yes, they're a bit stretched there, but don't worry about it. If you think about how something like this is made as well, it's made by a steam treatment. So this will be a long piece of wood, so all the grain will actually be going in a direction. And then what they do is they steam it and they shape it into shape. When wood is very pliable, you can shape it. It's how acoustic guitars are made and stuff. So what would happen is that grain that was once upon a time very straight is going to just curve with that surface. I'm making assumptions, I don't know. They might have made this a different way, I don't know. But I think that's a cool way of doing it. Boom, there you go. UVs are done. And all the UVs are now done. So what I'm going to do is go back to object mode. Make sure that my pivot point is in the middle of the object or in the middle of the world. And then I'm just going to duplicate and rotate around 90 degrees. There we go. Brilliant. So now the table's done. So I'm going to grab it all. Not worry about the placement of the UVs. I'm going to combine. Make sure the pivot point's at the very bottom of the object. Control, delete history, freeze transformation, give it a name. So this is going to be my SM table glass. And I'm not doing glass table because I'm going to use many tables or a few tables. So, you know, I might have table coffee, table bleu. And then I'm going to just double click and I'm going to copy paste that name, and then my export, I'm just going to paste that name back in for a bit of speed. Jump into my Unreal scene. Go to Geo, Enviro. Find I keep closing folders when I don't want them to. And this I'm going to go now. This is why I should keep folders open, because now I don't know what file it went into. Did it go there? It did. Table glass. So bring it in. Yep. Bring it in. Okay. Awesome. That's my table. I can play. I can have a look around. Where are we? There we go. So I can have a play. See how I feel about that. That's quite nice. Cool. So let's have a jump back and let's just actually have a closer look at this, because we're not quite done. There's a couple of things I need to do before I'm actually properly done and I can start thinking about materials and textures. One is a bit of a one to get your head around. It's probably one of the most complex elements of UVing, because it's actually a technical requirement when it comes to textures. And it's all about something called textile density. Okay, I've tried to record this part of the video about 4 times now, and everything keeps going wrong. So, we've modeled the object, and now we're going to start talking about something that's a little bit technical. I can't remember where I left off at the end of the proper first part of the video. It's a little bit technical, and it's a bit of a rabbit hole, and what I'm not going to do is try and go into the whole crazy detail about what it is or how it works or anything like that, because it's a real head scratcher, and even I really struggle with it, and I've been doing this for years. I really struggle with the science behind it, because it's all based around maths. But I'm just going to tell you the settings that we want to do for now, and then we can make changes later on if we need to. But it's called textile density, and we talked about it a little bit in class, but textile density is this whole technical part of the game making process, and in any game which requires 3D elements, textile density is the thing. You also have textile density when it relates to TV and film and movies, and any kind of CGI graphics. And it's all about the amount of pixels that are being shown on screen and the amount of pixels that are dedicated to an object. I'm gonna make a very simple way of explaining it. Basically, you've got to think about how big the object is in the scene in the real life. This is again why we're building to real world scale. And if you've got 2 objects next to each other, so if I go into Unreal I've got my marble flooring here, and it's like a big 4 meter by 4 meter section, and maybe that texture is 4K, big 4K texture. So it's crisp and it's clean and it's massive. And then I got a rug that sits on top of that, and that's a 4 meter by 4 meter rug. So awesome, both next to each other. They should have the same textile density. They should look the exact same kind of pixel quality. But if I've got a texture of that rug which is like 1024, so literally a quarter of the texture quality, texture size as my floor tiles, then I'm gonna see a very obvious difference. I'm gonna see like low res texture on the body, on the rug, and I'm gonna see really crisp texture on the floor. That's not right in it. So what textile density does, it works to help us get a cohesive textile density across our whole game. There is a bit of a not a quote, I guess, but textile density, also referred as pixel density and texture density, is a measurement unit used to make assets textures cohesive compared to each other throughout your entire world. It is measured in pixels per centimeters or pixels per meters. Annoyingly, Maya uses pixels per units, but I think the unit, because the units are centimeters, ours would be pixels per centimeter. And I'm going to put up an article about textile density and read through it because it is interesting, and it does go to some way of explaining it. But if I've got something which is really nice and clean in a game, geometry-wise, what I want to make sure is the texture also reflects that clean quality. And also it's scaling the world. I'm not going to put something which is the size of this. I'm not going to give this a 2K texture. I'm not even going to give this a 1K texture. This will be like a 512 texture because it's tiny. Tiny. Not even that, maybe a 256. It's a very small object. So I don't need the same level of density and the textile density as I do if I'm dealing with a massive piece of 4K flooring. Step back a second. No, I do. I do need the same textile density, but I need this to be. It needs to be the same picture quality, the same picture size. If the textile density is different on this, so if I've got a big 4K texture and I've got a big floor piece which is, fits that textile density, then that big square, cool. But then if my UVs for this take up a majority of that UV, well, that's not 4K, is it? That's less than 5 centimeters. So the textile density of that small object is going to be much denser than my 4K floor, which means that will have a crazy detailed texture and it won't fit with the world. However, if my textile density of this object is the same textile density of my floor, which means the UVs for these will be the same, the correct size relative to my big floor, then we're on to a winner. That's the way I see it in my head. That's the way I understand it. This is stuff that the real boffin technical artist people need to know about and do know about. And if you want to follow this world into technical art, and that is where the money is, that's where you're going to get a job. Then you need to find a way of understanding this. It is explained very poorly across the entire internet. It's always explained by people drawing out formulas, but it is what it is. Unfortunately, it's one of them things that's not very well explained, but unfortunately it's vital. Anyway, what we're going to do is not worry about how this relates to a big massive game environment or anything like that. For now, we're just going to worry about the object to object kind of scale and stuff. So at the minute I'm looking at this object, I've got the checkerboard on, and I can see that the textile density is wrong across a lot of it. So you can see there that the glass section at the front on the top there is other size. You can see the checkerboard quite well, but then across the outside rim here, it almost looks like the checkers are 2-3 times bigger, which means the actual UVs for these are smaller because the textile density is less. The bigger the checkerboard, the smaller the UV. The smaller the checkerboard, the bigger the UV. So if I go across this, I'm going to see there's big differences between all the different UVs, and that's a problem. What I want to do, what I want to do at first is make sure that everything is relatively the same, well, relative to each other, the same textile density, and then I can worry about the textile density relative to the the old game environment. So how I do that, it's actually really simple, thank God. Is inside my UV toolkit here, inside transform. At the bottom of there, I've got underneath tools, scale, I got textile density right there. Textile density, pixels per unit, I think centimeters. And then you've got the get. And what get does is when you have something selected, so for instance, I select this guy here, this big piece here, I'm going to get that. That's going to get that textile density ratio. So you can see that middle number there has now changed to 9.7029, which is a number that there's mathematics involved. That number means something, and this is all being calculated to fit to or to be relative to a 2K map. So if you imagine this section here is a 2K map, this would be so I'm trying to do the maths in my head. This would be, so that's 2K. Yeah, textile density. Yeah, I can't even do the maths in my head. It gives you a number. You get textile density, it gives you a number. And then you've got set. And what you can do with that is you can apply that textile density to everything else. So as you can see, all this textile density there are all different across the entire thing. I click set. Everything changes. You see all the UVs also change size. But it now means that all these UVs are all the exact same textile density, which is cool. It means they're all the same size. So if I grab all these guys and scale them up and down, it means they're all scaling uniformly. So they're all going to be the exact same textile density. Now what I tend to do, what I always do, is, and I don't understand the maths, but in my map size here, if I put 2K in there, I'm going to put 5.12, basically 512, 5.12 in there, where it says this number here, and I'll set that. Boom. So now all these are, this is 5.12 pixels per centimeter that is applied to a 2K map. Now if I set that to the map size to 1024 and apply the 5.12 pixels across a 1K map, well, technically you're taking up more space, so these will get bigger. Hopefully you'll understand that. So on a 2K map, if you think about 2K, literally 5.12 pixels, that's a section of a 2K map. If I half that size, now that 5.12 pixel is actually taking up more space. So if I go to 2048, then that 512 takes up less space. And then if I go to 4K, 4096, 4098, 4096, no, 4096. I had it right the first time. 96. So if I go to a 4K map, then that 512 is taking up even less space, so that means the UVs are going to be even smaller. But the texture quality will still be the same because of that. So on a 1K map, the texture quality is going to be the same because it's 5.12 pixels across a 10K, across a 1K. On a 2K, it's 5.12 pixels across a 2K. It's still going to be 5.2 pixels. The thing that I really struggle with, and I think it's what is confusing about this, is this number here. What does that mean? How do I get that number? This is something that's stumped me for years, and I need to find someone to properly explain it to me. But I tend to just stick with 2048. Now, if I want to jump up to a 4096 map, what I'm going to do is double this number. So I'll go up to 1024. So I go to a 4K map, 4096, and I change this to 10.24. Nothing changes because now I basically doubled the amount of pixels per unit while also doubling the map size, so technically nothing changes. But now if I go down to 2048, these UVs are going to get twice as big because I'm now taking up twice the amount of 5.12 pixels. Okay, so It's a bit of a one. Oh, no. 5.12. There you go. There you go. So, what I tend to start off with and stick with for a while, unless I need to, is 5.12 is my ratio, and then my map size is 2K. If you do that, you'll be fine. And then if we need to, we can scale these up and down relative to the object. Oh, long-winded one, that one. So yeah, that's textile density. It is important, and I'm going to try and find some documentation. I've already got this website here, which I'll be putting on the links and stuff. So, that's great. Not really worried about the layout as well for now, because I've not got any UVs, I've not got any materials to apply this to. But what I'm going to do now is try and export this, because the last video I tried to record of this, the fucking thing wasn't exporting. But I'll try and export this now. Okay. So this is going to be the 6th video I make for this bloody thing. I've solved the issue. I don't know how I've solved it, but I've solved it. Right, so I'll get back to it now. And if it breaks again, I'm going to break it. So, my glass table. I'm going to give it one material. There you go. So, when we import this into Unreal, so we imported all that kind of stuff. Export. Selection. Da-da, ba-da, ba-da. And then we go into Unreal. Our objects obviously have one material, but like I've said about a million times now, just in this video, I'm going to have different materials. I'm going to have glass, dark wood, plain wood, a brass material, and like a polished material. So that's 5 different materials. But I've only got one material slot here. To get those different material slots to allow me to have all these different UVs stacked on top of each other, it's a very efficient way of working. I'm going to assign a different material in all the areas I need that material to be. So the easiest one is just the glass at first. I'm just going to double click that face at the top. It's the glass section. I'm going to assign a Lambert. Yep. So I can color it if I want to, but I don't want to push fate today. I'm just going to apply it to there. The next one I'm going to do is the rim around the outside. So grow that. Make sure I've got all those faces selected. Like that. Yep, all that's good. As well as the legs. And this underside little rim here. This is all going to be this dark wood. So again, I will hold right click, assign new Lambert. There we go. So now my material here, I've got 3 different Lamberts. Then I've got another Lambert for my brass, this little ball in the middle, so I'm going to select that, right click, assign favorite material, assign Lambert, so that's one for that one. Then this bottom piece down here, again, assign favorite material, assign Lambert. What I've done is I've applied 5 different materials to that object now, in all the places where I want to have that, that separate material assigned. So I've got a material for the glass, which is only going to be applied to sections of the mesh that have that material assigned to it, so that's glass. I've got one which is going to be the dark wood, so that's going to be the legs, the rim, and the little thing underneath it. I've got one which is a little brass ball, I've got one which is the base, and then I've got one which is going to be the flatter areas of like the plain wood. So now what I'm going to do is export this, and I cross all my fingers and toes. So I go to File, Export Extension. There's no error message. Thank God. So I'm going to import this. Oops, a daisy. I'm going to import this. Okay, I might have exported the wrong one then. So let me export this again. There we go. Right, we got there in the end. It really isn't as hard as that. I've made that look hard because everything was fighting against me with this. The textile density stuff was fighting against me. Just applying materials was fighting against me. It's not as hard as I'm making it out to be. But now I've got 5 different materials, which means I can apply these 5 different general materials. Some of them are going to be big tiling materials for glass, for instance. Yeah, I'm going to have all these glass elements in the scene, so there's no reason for me to have a separate UV special thing and have all these unique glass textures. No, this glass is glass. So everything that has glass, I'm going to have that material assigned to it. I'm going to pull all this dark wood from a trim sheet that might contain other stuff. I might have like just a big tiling, polished marble, polished whatever this is down here. And then same thing for the ball at the bottom. I'm going to have like a tiling generic brass material. And then same thing for the woods underneath the glass and underneath at the bottom. A big old generic texture for that. Super good. So that means that I can literally inside the UV world not worry about having these UVs stacked on top of each other, because for my if I'm pulling these sections off a trim sheet, so that section, and obviously we've gone through and all the textile densities are correct now. So I can, there you go. So all of them can be pulled from, this strip down here in the texture might be just this dark wood texture. I can pull all that from there, and then I might have this, like these, so that one and that one. This is my plain wood section, so I could have these two literally stacked on top of each other, because there's no unique texture which is needed just for that specific bit. They're just pulling from the same information, so I can have them stacked on top. This brass texture, I can just pull that off some brass texture. That could be whatever, like there for instance. And then I've got okay, so these are both the polish sections. So the polish sections might have some directionality. So on this trim sheet, again, I might have, on this same trim sheet which is on this, I might have that polished, maybe it's polished marble, let's say. So I could pull these elements from that polished marble section, which takes up some area here, and then maybe these are being pulled off the same zone, so I can place those there. And like this is my glass, so I can just put this like here, because glass is glass. And you might think, oh my god, they're all on top of each other. They're all going to read the same texture. It's not. The different materials are going to, one, separate them off, so that they're not going to, you're not going to get the glass on a wooden section because the different materials are going to separate it. And then because we're using trim sheets, the trim sheets have all the information already. So it's not like we're baking any of that information in on the texture itself. So all that. So this is literally what my UV will generally look like at the end. And then all the different materials are going to help make it look good. And I've already got that going on. It's not in this scene, but I've already got going on with my walls in the one that's in the school. I've got all my walls and I've got my pillars. They've all got that same kind of effect on them. Where I've got, like, on my pillar especially, I've got all the UVs dedicated to that big white section of the pillar. They're all laid out. And then on the same UV sheet, I've got at the very bottom of it a section which is that granite. But then they're sat on top of the UVs that are assigned to the white material. But because they're pulling off two different materials, they don't show up on each other, which is really good. So cool. So we got to the end of that. I got a bit of editing to do in front of me now to get those videos together. The textile density thing is a bit of a head mash sciencey thing at first, because and even for me, I've been doing this for years, and I still struggle to understand the mathematics of it. But it's all just about making sure that the objects of the scene have the same UV scaling, so that all the pixels, all the textures look correct or cohesive. You're not going to have something which is small with a stupidly dense texture next to something which is big, which texture is like really grainy, because they're both technically filling up a 2K texture. But a 2K texture on this object and a 2K texture on me give you very, very different results. If I get a 2K texture, this will need to, and if only this gets a texture, this will need to be like, if I'm 2K, this would be like 256. Cool. So yeah, bit of a long one again, but that's what we went over on Friday, and it's just about the next step of the UV process, which is again relatively easy. There's not much that goes into that UVing process. All you've got to do is look at what mess your UVs are, and then just start to break down the UVs, going from the biggest shapes down to the smallest shapes on the object, and go through in chunks, and even break stuff up in materials. So if I've done that on mine, I've got if I move the glass out of the way, this is still all technically one solid piece of geometry, because that's how I built it. But if I think about this as a real piece of furniture design, then this internal piece here is going to be maybe 2 or 3 sheets of wood that have been glued together. because again, you'll rarely find a big piece of wood that big. So maybe these 2 or 3 pieces of wood to put together. But this will be one piece, and then obviously this will be the same piece down here. Like, oh, this will be the same piece down here because, that might be like a really thick piece of wood. And then around the outside, they would have another piece of wood that's been treated to be, steam bent and that kind of thing wrapped around it. That's 2 separate pieces of geometry, 2 pieces of UV on 1 piece of geometry. So this is 1 piece of physical wood. This is another piece of physical wood. And then this down here, yeah, it's still part of the same mesh. But because this is, again, if we think about how tables are made, this is going to be glued on the underside or even pinned to give it support and to help the legs stay in place. That will also be a new piece of UV, because also that's going to have a different texture applied to it. And then for this geezer as well, so unless I'm doing some sort of like really crazy lathe CNC machine thing, this is going to be 2 separate pieces of things. So I'll have a piece of wood at the bottom, let's say, and I've got another piece of wood on top like that, and they've literally just been like glued and hammered in place and then polished. And you when it's been painted and varnished and polished and stuff, you don't see the meeting, you just see kind of a one big shape. But I break those 2 up. Another reason why I break stuff up as well is if the general shape, I've got flat pieces top and bottom. So that's a plane, and then I've got cylindrical pieces around the outside. That's a cylinder. So I need to treat these things separately. So that's again why I planar projected the big flat pieces first on their own, and then I cylindrically projected the other pieces as 2 chunks. So this chunk, and then this chunk. Because of the size difference as well. The bottom piece is bigger, obviously, than the top piece, because you've got bigger piece and then smaller piece. And there's all this rationale for UVing. Again, it's not very hard, but it's a bit difficult at first. And I think a lot of people have this naturally. For some, annoys me, the new generation of people have this knee-jerk reaction to UVing and think, oh no, UVing is terrible, I'm terrible at it. It's probably been explained really badly in your college. You've probably just been told to, oh, just do this and whatever, and automatic unwrap and whatever, which is the worst thing you can do. And I'm also not great at explaining UVing, weirdly enough, even though I'm very, very good at it. But yeah, UVing is just a weird process at first, but when you get it, and you'll all get it. Cool. So that ends that. I'll see you in the next one, and I'm going to go edit these bloody videos together now.